Deseronto Lost, an absence of architecture, bulldozed buildings, disappearing details, and eliminated edifices. A presentation based on the July 2015 public lecture for the Deseronto Archives lecture series, read by the author, Edgar Tumak. I have been involved with architectural history and heritage planning since the late 1980s, following the completion of my master's from the Bartlett School of Architecture and Planning, University College, University of London, London, England. I came to reside in Deseronto to restore and adapt the former St. Mark's Anglican Church as a residence, and hope that it may be considered a superior example of heritage preservation for the community. This presentation will focus on towers, spires, cupolas, or dome-like structures, and so forth. These are the rooftop or high components that are expensive to build, vulnerable because of their exposure or technical or structural demands, and often short-lived. The development of Deseronto is inextricably linked with the Rathbun family, industrialist barons who controlled the town in the 19th and early 20th centuries. A circa 1895 map of Deseronto, which highlights the Rathbun industries, buildings, and other structures, offers an even greater indicator of Deseronto Lost, with more than 50 buildings, 10 major waterfront shipping piers, and a dense rail network completely gone. I toyed with incorporating some of this industrial infrastructure. However, this is far more than one can treat well in a short lecture. So, rather than give token treatment, I thought it better to save that for the future. Instead, by looking at the upper reaches of buildings that are mostly still here, we can perhaps start to appreciate change by reduction, i.e., how an edifice does not necessarily need to be eliminated, but can be eviscerated, and that the disappearance of detail can be the death of a design. This is a circa 1900 image of Deseronto, probably taken from the Rathbun Company's general office building or headquarters, formerly located at the south end of Mill Street, looking northeast. It, along with most of the archival images utilized in this presentation, are available through the Deseronto Archives Flickr system. Just right of center, in the distance and on the rise overlooking the town, is the former St. Mark's Anglican Church and Rectory on the left, the latter showing it was originally crowned by a cupola. Sometimes called a widow's walk, a cupola is a small dome or equivalent polygonal or rectilinear enclosed space crowning a roof, or sometimes serving as a belfry, light tower, or lookout. By contrast, the more familiar term, widow's walk, is an open-railed, porch-like area at the top of houses, from which a broad view was possible. These were particularly prominent in seaports to watch for incoming ships, and the cupola of St. Mark's Rectory would have functioned the same way, allowing the rector and household to keep track of incoming vessels, as Deseronto was an active shipping center at the time, and because clerics needed to keep track of the arrival of visitors and transient traffic prior to telephone. The image highlights the visibility, prominence, and isolation of the Anglican Church and Rectory, and further to the west or left on the same rise is the public school and water tower. The Methodist Church, now the United Church, is visible on the upper far right of the picture with a spire, destroyed by fire in 1905. Edward Wilkes Rathbun's house and residential compound on Main Street can be seen towards the center of the view. E.W. took over the direction of the Rathbun interests in 1863. The post office and Bank of Montreal, later Town Hall, opposite the Rathbun's house, would be built in 1901 and 1903-05 respectively. The long building to the east or right of the Rathbun house is the Big Store, although it looks like the Naylor's Theatre. However, the location of the Baker Block, with a long side wall sloping away from Main Street, shows that Naylor's Theatre of 1901 had not been built to the east of it. In the foreground, the stacks of lumber were not only present for shipment but also to dry. Drying kilns were not generally used at this time for regular construction lumber, and the presence of great quantities of wood drying at the heart of lumber towns for extended periods caused many fires, such as the 1896 fire in Deseronto that destroyed most of the east end of the town. This photo, from a few years after the fire, would have helped highlight how well the Rathbun Company had rebuilt. This is a contemporary view over Deseronto, towards the south end of Mill Street, from the approximate height and location of the former rectory cupola, looking towards the direction of the former Rathbun headquarters, from whence the previous photo was taken. Zooming in to show a detail from the first image provides a better view of the cupola on the Anglican rectory and the tower of St. Mark's Church when it had 5 levels. It is believed that the rectory was built first, and St. Mark's was built in 2 stages between 1878 and 1888, to the designs of nationally significant architect Frank Darling of Toronto. Darling designed many churches pro bono for Anglican parishes of limited means to honor the work of his father and brother, who were both prominent Anglican clerics in Toronto. As architect, Darling was responsible for the design and construction of many structures in Toronto for religious institutions, the University of Toronto, and his firm even designed the current Centre Block of Parliament in Ottawa. Unfortunately, one of the undoings of the tower for St. Mark's would be that Darling's practice became successful enough that the supervision he was able to give during the first phase was not possible in 1888, at which time inferior techniques and materials were used. Here we see the south face of St. Mark's Church, circa 1885, before the building was completed. The tower, stairway up to the main door, and chancel to the east or right of the nave have not been built. 3 men in clerical garb and 2 small children are visible on the steps leading up to the building. One may have been Thomas Stanton, the first incumbent of this church, who was appointed in 1880. Removal of plaster on the interior of the tower for repointing purposes has revealed that after the initial 2 stories of the tower, the thickness of the walls and the quality of the stones decreases substantially. At the base of the tower, the walls are 3 feet thick, but at the current shortened top, the 4th level, they are just over 1 foot. So the 5th level would have been even thinner, because it was standard practice to taper load-bearing walls as they rose, a structural system called battering, both to reduce the weight load and cost. This postcard of circa 1910 shows St. Mark's from the southwest, with the rectory and cupola partially visible in the rear. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Anglican churches were often referred to as the English Church, as this postcard does. The top or 5th level appears to be set back, i.e. thinner than the level below. The large opening on this level facilitated the sound of the bell to carry further. However, this and the thinness of the walls meant that there was less structural support for a 1-ton bronze bell, produced by McShane Foundry, Baltimore, 1888, which was only exacerbated by the bell's reverberation. St. Mark's was built in the Gothic Revival style, as were all 19th century churches in Deseronto. This style was inspired by buildings from medieval Europe. Initially introduced in Canada in the 1820s to 1830s, the style persisted across Canada for over a century, especially in religious architecture. Identified by features such as pointed arches for door and window openings, buttresses, and pinnacles, the style evolved through various stages. St. Mark's mostly adheres to the phase promoted by a group of British theologians known as ecclesiologists, which the architect's cleric father and brother espoused. This promoted worship that harkened back to English practices of the medieval period, including those of its architecture. A November 1942 wedding photo is the earliest known image to show the shortened St. Mark's Tower seen in the background. However, the year the tower was shortened and the heavy bell lowered to the level below are not known. It was likely in the 1930s, as a steel beam was used to support the concrete roof deck. Steel would have been very difficult to obtain for civilian use during the war years. In keeping with the original design, a suggestion of a crenellated parapet was retained. Crenellation, or battlement, is a parapet of embrasures and raised portions or merlons. The medieval military architectural forms, while not entirely religious, did give symbolic expression as a fortress of God. A detail again of the first image of circa 1900 of Deseronto brings us back to the cupola on the Anglican rectory. Unfortunately, this and the sixth image were the only images located for this lecture that show the cupola. The attic of the former St. Mark's Rectory shows roof modification of the removal of the cupola from. As commented earlier, towers and rooftop structures are exposed, and hence fragile constructs, and often need significant intervention after 30 to 40 years in the Canadian climate. Based on the lumber treatment, the cupola might have been removed in the 1920s, when Reverend Stanton's widow died, and the house was formally transferred to the parish. A cupola, similar to what the St. Mark's Rectory cupola would have looked like, is present at the northeast corner of West and Dundas Street West streets in the nearby town of Napanee. A detail of the previous image showing the windows have been sealed off. Also on West Street in Napanee, we see a variation on a cupola design, however, with a building similar in scale to the St. Mark's Rectory. A detail of the cupola of the previous image. This cupola is more substantial than what formerly crowned the St. Mark's Rectory. A detail of the first slide, circa 1900, however, focusing in on the second Deseronto Public School constructed in 1877, as well as on the water tower to the right or east. Starting in the 1860s, the first public school rooms were housed in what is now the fire hall. The second Deseronto Public School, viewed from the southwest circa 1910, with a better view of the cupola over the main entrance. The building had a cruciform plan, i.e., cross-shaped, to allow more daylight into the rooms in a period when artificial light was not used. The cupola most likely housed the school bell. The original structure had 3 classrooms. This was enlarged to 10 classrooms in 1908. There were extensive interior renovations in 1923, and the building was replaced and demolished in 1957 by the current public school. The site has remained vacant since that time. After several years of pressure, in 2014, the site was finally rezoned with a strip retained for school parking. However, the school board requested that the remainder of the site be listed less usefully as single-family residential, not broader community use, and the site remains not for sale and vacant. When the school board says it needs more money in levies, it might be useful to remember that after more than a century, it still sits on a large parcel of unused land, which at the same time means the town does not receive any tax income from the site. The house of Frederick Sherwood Rathbun, who lived from 1856 to 1898, formerly at the northwest corner of Dundas and Centre Streets, photographed circa 1890. The image indicates it was recently built, although stylistically the architecture is more in keeping with the 1870s. The cupola was accessed through the attic-level servants' quarters, which were lighted by the narrow and low windows below the eaves and the slightly higher ones under the pediments. With no insulation, these rooms would have been beastly hot in the summer and frigid in the winter. Note the bode, or horseshoe-shaped corner stair of the front porch. There was an excellent view of the town even from this porch, and even better from the cupola. Before the construction of the 401 highway, a few kilometers north of Deseronto, Dundas, which is also Highway 2, was well trafficked, and, after the Rathbuns, the building operated as an overnight tourist home, then apartments. It was destroyed by a massive fire in 2008. Shortly before the fire, the building had become very degraded, with pigeon waste forming a thick layer over the entire attic level and cupola. The fire that destroyed the building was so intense that measures to control it pretty much drained the town's water tower. Cleanup from the fire cost the town a bundle, because asbestos insulation in the building, that had become airborne during the fire, needed immediate cleanup. Even the finely tooled masonry foundation could not be retained in the need for rapid treatment. The cost of the cleanup was not covered by insurance, because the owner's was void. There had been 2 previous suspicious fires with other properties he owned, and the doors had been left opened to the abandoned building. Further, shortly before the fire, the town's insurer had quietly dropped asbestos from its list of hazardous materials that it would clean up. In 2014, the land became property of the town because there was more owing on it from the cleanup and back taxes than the vacant land was worth. Options for a private-public partnership were developed, and, as an architectural historian and heritage planner, I dream of imaginative solutions for multiple occupant housing for people of an older age, with a structure that might in some way, with contemporary design, reflect the qualities of the original structure. The former house of F.S. Rathbun, in an image dating between 1962 and 1970, viewed from the east from the Deseronto Water Tower. Not visible, but to the west, is the Hugo Burghardt Rathbun Mansion at 313 Dundas Street, the only remaining principal Rathbun residence in Deseronto. H.B. Rathbun, who lived from 1812 to 1886, significantly expanded the Rathbun interests in Deseronto, which his brother Amos started. The grounds of the H.B. Rathbun Mansion included the still remaining header house, originally a pyramidal structure that served as a water tower that also provided water and heat for an adjoining greenhouse, no longer extant. The grounds of this header house, now a separate residence, include highly tooled stone foundations of a former building, perhaps a carriage house. Here the building is seen viewed from the northwest or back. This image shows the structure was taller and may have come to a full point, whereas the current structure is truncated just above the second-level windows. The header house, viewed circa 1965 from the south. By then it was shortened, but still was clad with the decoratively cut shingles and ornamental window surrounds. As part of the theme Deseronto Lost, an absence of architecture, I have opted to include something never built, a proposed estate for E.W. Rathbun, the head of Rathbun interests at the time, and, hence, the preeminent figure in town. It was to be located at the east end of Stanley Avenue, and the design of 1892 is by Langley and Burke architects. While the lands north of Dundas became the domain of Rathbun mansions and substantial residences of senior managers, it seems that Stanley Avenue in particular was intended to be a fitting approach to the estate. First, it was the only street at that time given the grander-sounding avenue designation, and structures approaching it would have created a sense of significance, e.g., the public school, the Anglican rectory, St. Mark's Church. The site is illustrated in the bottom left of the full plan, but not included in this detail. The Roman Catholic Church, then located on a lot located on the bottom right of the full plan at the east end of Dundas, and the FS and HB Rathbun residences to the west of Centre Street. Further, after passing the entrance lodge of the estate, there was a porte cochere, so one could ceremoniously exit a carriage under a protective roof. There was a kitchen wing on the cooler north side, because wood-burning ovens often had fires burning constantly. There was a stable with walled stable yard, and there were different types of conservatories with propagating greenhouse and attached heating building, serving the same function as the header house of the H.B. Rathbun mansion. Conservatories and greenhouses were particularly popular amongst the wealthy, as not only did they provide plants for ornament and fresh food consumption during the 3 cold seasons, but their cost of construction and operation spoke of financial ability. The green letters denote different trees suggested for planting. The 4 elevations of the main house are illustrated here in a Queen Anne Revival style design, which was at its height of popularity in Canada at the time. The Queen Anne Revival style was an extremely eclectic style, most often associated with houses. It became prominent in Britain in the 1870s, and its originator, Norman Shaw, chose a combination Gothic-classical aesthetic that he thought might be indicative of vernacular buildings during the reign of Queen Anne of Britain, who reigned from 1702 to 1714. In Canada, the style was prominent into the first decade of the 20th century. While the style combined both medieval and classical motifs, it could also focus on just the classical, albeit with proportions and assemblage that was not strictly classical. Features in the proposed design that are hallmarks of the style include the gambrel pediment and Palladian windows on the north elevation, which is a 3-part window with a central section that has a semicircular top and rectangular flanking windows. The tall chimneys with prominent inset channeling, bulbous small columns for the porches or verandas, a south/principal elevation given particular elaboration with an oval-shaped œil de bœuf, bullseye, window, and other principal windows, featuring a multiplicity of more expensive panes, usually of colored or beveled glass in the upper third, and the 2 towers that dominate the west or entrance elevation, which also assert the style. The towers and the expansive dormer windows would have provided views of Rathbun interests both in the town to the south and to its farmland to the north, which was notable for pursuing advanced, even leading-edge experimental agricultural practices. The architects, Langley and Burke, are a notable firm in Canadian architectural history with prestigious religious, retail, and residential commissions. Henry Langley, who lived from 1836 to 1907, started a very successful Toronto architectural practice with Thomas Gundry in 1862. Eventually, he took in his nephew, Edmund Burke, who lived from 1850 to 1919, into the partnership. The firm was very successful, although Burke left in 1892. Accordingly, the Rathbun proposal would have been one of the last designs of the 2 men working in partnership. During the balance of Langley's career, he worked with his son Charles, who lived from 1870 to 1951. However, the patronage of many merchant princes, such as the Simpsons of department store empire renown, and Baptist congregations followed Burke, who formed a partnership with H.C.B. Horwood, another extremely successful Toronto architectural practice that lasted until Burke's death. It is not known why the Rathbun estate was not built, but there are several explanations of financial strain on the Rathbuns. In 1893, Canada and all the Western world experienced a serious financial depression. The 1896 fire destroyed much of Deseronto, and by the close of the 1890s, the Rathbun enterprises in Deseronto were on the decline. Additionally, it may also have been the pragmatic character of the Rathbuns and other lumber baron industrialist entrepreneurs who came to eastern Canada from New York State in the mid-19th century. Such barons in Ottawa, such as the Booths and Bronsons, were similar, and it was left up to their third or fourth generation scions to display the family wealth in residential extravagance. The Rathbun General Office Headquarters, constructed in the 1880s, located at the south end of Mill Street, east side, viewed from the northwest circa 1891. Many photographs from elevated views showing buildings and industrial activities in Deseronto appear to have been taken from the towered rooftop of this structure. The cornice of the brick building features a heavy zigzag pattern that was present in other Rathbun buildings, such as the locomotive shop, and can still be seen later in other buildings of this presentation, notably the Methodist or United Church. Aesthetically, the building is rather dour, but its formidable manner was meant to architecturally convey that the Rathbuns meant business when it came to business. Nonetheless, the appearance of the building was important to impress visitors and investors. As one can note, there was care taken to water the plantings. A circa 1910 photograph of the Deseronto waterfront looking northeast. The Rathbun headquarters building is to the left of center. The railway station and steamboat wharf are in the center foreground, and a cold storage warehouse is to the right. The railway station is the Bay of Quinte Railway, owned by the Rathbuns, not the CNR station located further west on Main Street. A circa 1917 image of the Rathbun headquarters in the background. In the foreground is the mill pond featuring water barrel horse races for men serving with Camp Rathbun, located at the north end of Deseronto in the First World War. Despite being such a prominent structure on the waterfront, when the Rathbun headquarters was demolished is not known. It may have been as late as the 1960s or 1970s. Part of the circa 1895 plan of Deseronto, mentioned in this lecture, showing the Rathbun General Office, i.e. headquarters, number 19, the East Yard, at the bottom right, the Bay of Quinte railway terminus and steamship wharf, what is now the south end of Mill Street, between numbers 4 and 21, and the locomotive shop and turntable, number 19, with the round shape below it, or south. The E.W. Rathbun walled residential compound is located at the top right, formerly located on Main Street, opposite Town Hall, the former Bank of Montreal. Shown in the full plan as buildings number 31 through 34, only the footprint of 34, the ice house, in the southeast corner of the compound, is shown in this image. By choosing to live so close to the industrial, rail, and shipping activity in what is now Water Street, and further towards the water, it is clear E.W. Rathbun did not subscribe to the NIMBY concept, i.e., not in my backyard. Churches particularly used verticality to express their prominence in the community in the 19th century. The first to do so was the Methodist Church, now Grace United, built in 1877 and seen in this photograph of circa 1895. The tower is topped by a spire, and also visible is the original large, low window set between the two entrances on the west wall facing 4th Street. This window was replaced with 3 separate windows located in a higher placement on the wall to accommodate the new entrance porches and gallery at the entrance or west end of the church. A residence on the currently vacant lot to the north is visible in this and the following slide. The Methodist Church as it appeared circa 1920, showing the tower after it was topped by a crenellated parapet following a 1905 fire that destroyed the spire. Evidence of the transition is the variation in the brickwork, seen between the pointed arch and round louvered openings. The changes to the original window and entrances on the west or 4th Street wall and at the base of the tower have occurred. The date of these alterations may be associated with the 1905 reworking of the tower, or the 1900 Sunday School extension at the east end of the building, now known as Stover Hall. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, urban Methodist churches often created a two-story, U-shaped layout for the Sunday school, which allowed for physical recreation on a sprung, gym-like floor. Classrooms were arranged around the perimeter at the ground level, while the central space was open and rose 2 stories to allow light into the central space and heat from activities and assemblies to rise, and sometimes to provide a viewing gallery at the second level. The classrooms had movable partitions that could open to the central space. Although a drop ceiling has reduced the interior to a single story at Deseronto Grace United, this 2-story arrangement is demonstrated by sealed upper-level windows visible on the exterior. The current appearance of Deseronto Grace United Church after the tower received its most recent shortening in 2006, and the earlier sealing of the Sunday School or Stover Hall second-level windows. The current appearance of the Presbyterian Church of the Redeemer, St. George Street, with a former manse to the south or left, and on the right or north, an even more commodious house that, among various occupants, was the residence of the managers of the Bank of Montreal. The Presbyterian Church, viewed from the southeast, circa 1900, with a 48-foot tower topped originally by an exuberant 65-foot spire, sporting 4 corner finials that give a Gothic look, seemingly inspired by the Czech medieval tradition, particularly in Prague. The original cedar roof shingles were painted to look like slate. Again, we see the manse in the foreground, and to the north or right of the church is the former residence of the Bank of Montreal managers. Frederick Williams Taylor, who lived from 1863 to 1945, managed the Deseronto branch between 1896 and 1898, and went on to manage the Bank of Montreal's affairs in London, England, in 1906. He was knighted in 1913 and became the general manager of the Bank of Montreal in the same year. It was also the residence of J.P. Ashworth, bank manager from May 1903 to November 1923, who came from a prominent line of federal civil servants originating with the bureaucracy in Quebec City and eventually Ottawa, and under whom the current Bank of Montreal structure, now Deseronto Town Hall, was built. The Church of the Redeemer was designed by architect James Burgess. We know little of his work, but the design has a fluid command of the Gothic Revival style, including the polygonal space at the west or rear of the building, which is in keeping with Gothic treatment for a chancel or apsidal end, even though it is separated from the interior of the liturgical space, unlike a true chancel or apse. The interior is also striking, with extensive interior woodwork of alternating layers of cherry and blonde-colored wood. The cornerstone was laid by co-founder of the Rathbun interests in Deseronto, H.B. Rathbun, in 1881. The year Mill Point was renamed Deseronto and opened at the beginning of 1883. Not only did the Rathbun family run Deseronto as a one-company town, but they were closely involved with the Presbyterian Church from its earliest days. H.B.'s son and successor, E.W. Rathbun, took charge of the Sunday school in the 1860s. Deseronto Presbyterians did not have their own minister until 1876, when the Reverend Robert John Craig was appointed to the village. He soon married Gertrude Rathbun, the younger sister of E.W., thereby cementing the Presbyterian link with the Rathbuns. The Rathbun focus with the church is made even more sharp by its relation to the west side of the mansion of Patriarch H.B. Rathbun at 313 Dundas Street, where a 2-story bay window, lighting 2 principal rooms, gave a direct view of the church front across the landscape estate, as there were no buildings on the east side of St. George Street until the mid-20th century, and hence there was a direct line of vision. St. Vincent de Paul Roman Catholic Church, constructed 1896, and probably photographed shortly after the construction of the presbytery to the left or west in 1905 to 1906. The new church announced itself proudly with a 72-foot high tower of 14 feet square. The corner finials of the tower look like mini towers, each surmounted by a cross. Exposed at a significant height, without heat, these finials were subjected to very extreme conditions and, based on changes apparent in subsequent early photographs, the brickwork soon failed. This is the second permanent Roman Catholic church in Deseronto. As noted earlier, the first of 1883 was located at the eastern edge of town, on the north side of Dundas, almost where the current Pentecostal church is located. The land was donated by the Rathbun family, with the site noted on the periphery of the 1892 Rathbun estate proposal. Giving land for a church was not only philanthropic or religious, but very good business. One of the best ways to improve property values in 19th century Ontario was to have a brick or stone church in a neighborhood, as it was an important measure to attract and retain workers and their families. A disastrous fire destroyed much of the eastern end of Deseronto on Victoria Day, 1896, including the Roman Catholic Church. 80 families were left homeless by the blaze, and in a time prior to a social network, the loss of a family's livelihood was particularly dire. It was decided to locate the new church building on the western side of Deseronto, at the junction of Dundas and Brant Streets, perhaps because there were no industries with their unregulated and incendiary qualities. Once again, the land was donated by the Rathbun family. Work began on September 1st, 1896, and the first Mass was celebrated, quite remarkably, by November 29th, with the service of dedication on September 12th, 1897. Thomas Hanley of Belleville designed the new church. He also designed the Deseronto High School in 1889, to be discussed later, Deseronto's Naylor's Theatre on Main Street in 1901, now just a rapidly deteriorating brick shell, and Glanmore House in Belleville, now a museum and National Historic Site. The design of St. Vincent has all the key motifs of the Gothic Revival style on the exterior. Pointed arches over the windows and doors, rose or round window over the main south Dundas Street entrance, stepped buttresses at the corners and lower buttresses along the side walls, corner tower pinnacles, and above the doors, quatrefoil windows, a bit like four-petaled flowers, and an asymmetrically placed tower. However, much like the United Church, these stylistic references do not form the essence of the style, but are decorative. St. Vincent, circa 1920, with the corner finials gone. The current appearance of St. Vincent, with the heavy tower cornice removed and a pragmatic roof applied. The muscular elevation of the tower with the finials, which was replaced by the simplified horizontal parapet, has now a cap-like roof covering. The former presbytery has recently received restoration, although a rail on top of the veranda, which created an upper gallery, was removed when it still belonged to the parish. Deseronto High School, constructed 1889, viewed from the southeast circa 1890. The former cupola and flagpole are extravagant structures, equivalent in height to the three-story school. The newspaper article covering the opening of the building described it as having a grand view of the Bay of Quinte and surrounding country, obtained from the school windows and observatory, i.e. dome. Visitors all expressed themselves delighted with the outlook, which rewards an ascent to the tower. This report in the Tribune offers a wonderful description of the opening of the school, from which I will read as I go through the next archival images of the building. It starts. On Tuesday, January 7th, 1890, in a practical, businesslike manner, characteristic of the industrial center, the Deseronto High School was declared open for the high functions to which it will hereafter be devoted. There were no orations by eminent educationists, no interchange of empty compliments by civic officials, no devotional chanting of national anthems. But, without waste of time, teachers, after a few prefatory remarks, commenced to assign duties to their respective classes. This event, it is unnecessary to state, marks the beginning of another important era in the history of Deseronto. By the opening of the high school, the educational system of our young town may be said to be completed. Notwithstanding the rapid growth of the population, the Public School Board have in the past endeavored to give suitable educational facilities and maintain the efficiency of schools. It has been felt, however, that more was needed, and that without a high school the youth of Deseronto were in an educational point of view placed at the disadvantage. This defect was the more severely felt inasmuch as our population is chiefly composed of working men who generally found that it entailed too great an expense to send their children elsewhere to take a course at a high school. For these and other reasons, it was finally decided to establish a high school in Deseronto, and the necessary appropriation was made by the town council. The work commenced and speedily carried forward to completion. The result is the handsome edifice opened on Tuesday, and by all visitors conceded most creditable to the enterprise of the citizens of this important town. Notwithstanding the prevailing epidemic of influenza, 42 pupils have been already enrolled, and the prospects are bright for a large attendance in the not distant future. The school is thoroughly equipped with all the modern appliances, and in this respect holds a unique position in this part of Ontario. Mr. A. G. Knight, B.A., a distinguished graduate of Victoria College and lately principal of the Campbellford High School, who has a provincial reputation as a successful educationist, is headmaster and takes charge of the English and classical departments. The members of the high school board are energetic gentlemen, and with such a competent staff and intelligent classes of pupils, the Deseronto High School must soon assume a prominent position among the educational institutions of this great province. The building is situated on a piece of land 3 acres in extent, secured from the Mohawk of Tyendinaga Reserve for the purpose, and which faces on Brant, Thomas, and a new street recently opened up by the council, i.e. College. The edifice consists of 3 stories and a basement, or practically of 4 stories, as the basement is thoroughly finished, bright, and airy. The basement is built of limestone, and the next 2 stories of brick, with a mansard roof above. The Tribune report continues. The whole is surmounted by a tower, i.e. really a dome, 30 feet high and attaining an altitude of 72 feet above the ground. The bell on the flagstaff being 100 feet above Mother Earth. The basement contains 2 large playrooms for boys and girls, or, as we are describing a high school, for young ladies and gentlemen respectively. It is also furnished with the Smead, Dowd and Company system of ventilation and closets, i.e. toilets, now rapidly coming into use in the better class of school building in this province. On the first floor are 2 classrooms, with library and the necessary lobbies and passages. On the next flat, i.e. second floor, are also 2 classrooms with chemical laboratory tower, i.e. chemistry lab, furnished with suitable tables, desks, etc. On the 3rd floor is the large assembly room, 50 by 34 feet, with raised stage, dressing rooms, and etc., in which will be held commencement and other exercises open to the public. The 2 principal flats are furnished in natural wood oiled. The basement and assembly room are painted, and all the floors throughout the building are oiled. The whole building has been arranged and piped for gas. Wash basins and hat and cloak rooms are found on every floor. There are 2 large main entrances, and the different stairways are all easy of ascent, i.e., separate entrances and stairways for boys and girls. The Tribune article concludes, "The edifice is well lighted in every part by the large windows. The appearance of the exterior of the building is relieved by a heavy cornice and barge boards for ornamental purposes on the 3 sides fronting the street. In fine, nothing has been left undone to make the high school building complete in every particular, and there is but one expression of opinion: that the building is creditable in every respect to the town of Deseronto. The building erection was given to the Rathbun Company of Deseronto, the direction of the work being given to Mr. William Irvine, superintendent of the sash and door factory department of the company's business. The contractors broke ground for excavation on the 27th of June and had their contract finished at New Year's, showing that the work must have been carried forward with great energy." It is hard to place a stylistic label on the high school, but the description of Victorian eclectic is in keeping with another such effusive example being the Lunenburg Academy, built between 1893 to 1895 in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, which still functions as a school and retains its open playground area. It was designated a National Historic Site in 1983 and features many of the planning arrangements of the Deseronto High School, including the separate entrances for boys and girls and the 3rd floor assembly space, as it was easier to construct a large, unobstructed open span on the top level of a building. The heritage value of the Lunenburg Academy lies in its historical, architectural, and contextual attributes, the latter meaning the traditional school grounds around it. The Academy is one of the most striking of Lunenburg's large stock of 19th century buildings. The current, domeless appearance of the former Deseronto High School from the southwest. It has now been divided into apartments, and the land facing Brant and College Streets has been developed for residential development, enclosing the land on 3 sides and seriously affecting the presence of the building. When trying to describe whether the high school had a dome, cupola, observatory, or tower, Deseronto's archivist and I, with our backgrounds in British history, responded with the term panopticon. The panopticon is a type of institutional building conceived by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. The concept of the design is to allow a single watchman to observe, opticon, all inmates, pan, of an institution, without the inmates being able to tell whether or not they are being watched. The concept soon became best known for observational domes. Bentham considered the concept equally applicable to hospitals, schools, sanatoria, daycares, and asylums, but he devoted most of his efforts to designs for prisons. One of the best examples in Canada is Kingston Penitentiary. here viewed from the north, or front, circa 1901. Opened in 1835, with construction of the original plan continuing to 1869. Its layout featured an imposing front gate, leading to a cross-shaped cell block centered on a rotunda surmounted by a dome, completed between 1859 to 61. It became the model for other federal Canadian prisons for more than a century. William Powers, the deputy warden of Auburn Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, furnished designs for the facilities inside the walls. And leading Kingston architects, John Mills, William Coverdale, and Edward Horsey, in succession further developed the plans and oversaw the construction. My interest in Bentham is also piqued because he is closely associated with my alma mater, University College, London, England. Bentham was gifted intellectually, and at 12 he was sent to Queen's College, Oxford. His father, a prosperous attorney, decided that Jeremy would follow him into the law. Bentham, however, soon became disillusioned with the law, so instead of practicing it, he wrote about it, spending his life critiquing and suggesting ways for improvement. His father's death in 1792 left him financially independent, and he wrote voluminously into his 80s. In the 1820s, Bentham had become a widely respected figure. His ideas greatly influenced the reforms of public administration made during the 19th century, and, in addition to prison reform, he sought changes in policy regarding religion, relief for the poor, international law, animal welfare, universal suffrage, i.e. the vote for all men and notably women, and the decriminalization of homosexuality. While Bentham played no direct part in the establishment of University College London, UCL, because of his advancing age, he is considered its spiritual father, as UCL's founders openly acknowledged his ideas on education and society in the creation of the new university. Bentham believed that education should be made more widely available, and not only to those who were wealthy and members of the established church, as was the case at the traditional universities, Oxford and Cambridge. UCL was the first English university to open its doors to all, regardless of race, creed, political belief, or religion. Prior to this, dissenters, i.e. non-Anglicans, could not study at an English university. Thus, it was only right that UCL should provide a home for both Bentham's manuscripts and his famous, or perhaps notorious, autoicon. This is located at the end of the south cloisters of UCL's main building. It is a wooden cabinet, which through the large glass front shows Bentham seated, dressed in his clothes, with a preserved body surmounted by a wax head. Bentham requested that his body be preserved in this way, albeit the head was supposed to be real. But the hoped-for, lifelike preservation process didn't succeed. Not surprisingly, this relic has given rise to numerous legends and anecdotes. One of the most commonly recounted is that the autoicon is solemnly wheeled into the college council meetings. This is myth, but a very good story for naive students. However, just like the autoicon, the panopticon concept proved problematic, if not weird. After almost every British and North American prison had been built with a nod to the panopticon idea, practical application saw it as a dismal failure. Further, the panopticon-like dome of Deseronto High School proved short-lived. According to the architectural drawings, it appears that a complete view from the dome was not possible from the tight interior, only from the exterior, narrow wood catwalk. In addition to this being treacherous in inclement weather, the wood construction meant it would have needed replacement within 20 to 30 years after construction. Evidently, it was not. The final building in this lecture, post office, seen here from the southwest, circa 1910, This is the only tower that has not failed in town. There is a large garland over Main Street, which was a popular type of celebratory official street adornment in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The building dates from 1901 and was constructed in the Romanesque Revival style to the designs of the Chief Architect's branch of the Department of Public Works, directed from 1897 to 1914 by David Ewart, although Ewart may not have been personally responsible for the design of the Deseronto Post Office. At this time, post offices were important symbols of federal authority, often being some of the most imposing and significant structures in a municipality, small or large. Under Ewart's direction, the branch used a variety of styles for prominent buildings: Romanesque Revival, a carryover from his predecessor who promoted the style in Canada; Edwardian Baroque, which Ewart introduced to the branch; and Tudor, of the late medieval Gothic tradition of the palaces of Tudor monarchs of England, which evolved from the Gothic-style Parliament buildings into the chateau style that came to dominate the parliamentary precinct of Ottawa, as well as elite hotels across Canada. The robust nature of the Romanesque Revival was well suited for public or institutional buildings where a commanding presence was desired in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as it is characterized by rugged stone wall surfaces, squat columns or piers, massive semicircular arches, heavy, oversized stonework and carving, and round, square, and multi-sided towers or bays. All of the above characteristics of the style can be seen in the Deseronto Post Office, where the design masterfully combines a square corner tower with an adjoining multi-sided tower-like bay housing the principal stair. The imposing nature of the building's design is augmented by the use of local Quinte limestone and whiter Kingston limestone for the finely tooled stonework, and random rocks distributed throughout the walls. This decorative use of two types of limestone can be seen in St. Mark's, previously mentioned. The building is visually grounded to its site, with the walls stepped back from the foundation, while the roofline is animated with stone gables on the south, Main Street, and north sides. Different roof caps of the towers, and dormer windows on all but the south side, which, with their wood surrounds, communicated in the 19th century that this was a residential level. The roof is covered with slate shingles and metal, initially probably copper. Also notable are the gate posts on the main and center street sides, which, with their commanding globe caps, give an air of restricted access to the service area behind. Finely tooled masonry, known as ashlar, surrounds the main entrance arches and the clock faces. Tooth-like corbels with prominent corner brackets support the overhang of the sloped roofs. Also notable is the variety of window shapes and sizes. All these contrasting features could easily have become chaotic, but the skill of the chief architect's branch has resulted in a highly appealing design. It was a design for a street corner that Ewart's office excelled at and utilized with other styles, such as the Edwardian Baroque. The Romanesque Revival style revived the European medieval aesthetic of the 11th and 12th centuries. The Deseronto Post Office belongs to the second phase of the Romanesque Revival style in Canada, which originated earlier with the influence of American architect H. Richardson, who interpreted this medieval style in an highly individual manner, often called Richardsonian Romanesque. A nearby example of this first phase is the former Napanee Post Office and Customs House, a red sandstone structure at the southeast corner of Bridge and John Streets, dating from 1888. It ceased being used for these purposes in 1969. It was also designed by the Chief Architect's branch of the Department of Public Works, under the leadership of Thomas Fuller, Ewart's predecessor. However, Ewart would have been very familiar with this work as he started his employ with the department in 1871 and worked under Fuller. Later, as chief architect, Ewart was aided by his son Henry Ewart and T.W. Fuller, son of Thomas, who later became chief architect. As is evident from the above, at the time, the chief architect's branch was quite insular and would remain so until the 1930s. Most building designs were completed in-house by the branch. Post offices and federal buildings were each individually designed, but were imbued with a certain resemblance. Individual buildings were generally not attributed to a single employee, if not until they retired, and new styles were slow to be adopted. However, this does not mean that the quality of design and construction, or even cost effectiveness, was inferior. The Deseronto Post Office was particularly large because it also provided accommodation for the Customs Service, the Indian Agent, and living space in the third level for an employee or caretaker. Life in Deseronto and in the third level residential space has been portrayed in Francis Attani's novels Deafening of 2003 and its follow-up, Tell, of 2014. In this aerial photograph, circa 1917, looking at Deseronto's downtown from the east, the post office holds prominence in the upper center of the picture, with St. George Street at the bottom, Edmund Street to the left, Center Street towards the top, and Main Street on the right. The Rathbun Company's cedar mill can be seen at the top right of the photograph, behind some railway cars on the Bay of Quinte railway tracks. Near the bottom left is the fire hall with a tapered tower that might have been for hose drying, because, prior to rubberized hoses, drying towers were required after each use for airing. This tower is no longer present, and most such fire hall towers have been demolished. The image also shows how close the rail tracks were set behind Main Street buildings, including the Edward Wilkes Rathbun House, opposite the park, to the east of the post office and the current town hall. The image indicates the economic importance of Deseronto, which warranted such a commanding, multi-purpose structure. Earlier images reinforced this by showing its busy harbor and other industries. Clock faces on all sides of the upper level of the tower not only distinguished the building, but, with a bell in the tower that regularly chimed the hour, these aided with industrial activity, because at the time, reliable watches and clocks were not too common among factory laborers. In conclusion, it is hoped that this lecture will provide a better understanding of the differences between towers, spires, cupolas, and domes associated with Deseronto, and how these and other heritage components can have key design and heritage defining qualities. While expensive and vulnerable because of their exposure or technical and structural demands, they create an excitement and interest in the building and for the community. The Rathbuns and early town officials saw architecture not only as examples of community pride, but as an important way of promoting the town. It is for this reason that the designer and selection committee of the current town logo naturally gravitated to the one remaining intact tower. Unfortunately, the post office is a mostly vacant federal building, not a municipal or even community-based structure. The maintenance of building-defining elements and detail need not rest with institutional structures. It is also important with houses. Original porches, windows, and decorative detailing are often replaced, with far simpler components at a cost far exceeding that of repair or future energy savings. Accordingly, we need not look at just the upper reaches of so-called important buildings, but we can perhaps start to appreciate the negative effects of change by reduction, and how an edifice does not necessarily need to be eliminated, but can be eviscerated, and that the disappearance of detail can be the death of a design, and that heritage is worth preserving.